Good evening to you and welcome again to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. It's the last Wednesday of the month of December and the last Wednesday of the year 2021. And what a year it was. Many social issues plagued the national and the global landscape over the past 12 months. Issues that created much public discussion, evoking heated, rational, compassionate, or even emotionally charged reactions from both private and public officials. This evening, inside the Citizens Community Forum, and for the year, and as the year comes to a close, in our Year in Review segment, we are going to recap 6 of the many topical issues of the year gone by. First, our recap begins with topic number 6, the month of July, where we focused on the global pandemic and the deadly coronavirus. And of course, our guest at that time, former Government Minister of Health, Dr. Fuad Khan, as he discussed the topic vaccination in a pandemic. Let's recap. The issue of vaccination, we are in fact in a pandemic, and I'm not sure which side of the coin that you are on, but of course you would have a perspective. What is your overall, view on this whole vaccination? Should we be going by way of having a robust system, trying to ramp up, trying to get the population, as many people vaccinated as possible, or are you also hearing the side of persons who are saying, well, I do have a right to self-determination?
Well, Stephen, if you look at the broad picture and what is being presented by the various governments, ours included, they are following the World Health Organization thrust for vaccination.
Yes. And
if you've noticed what has happened over the last 15 months or 16 months, worldwide, but more so in Trinidad and Tobago, the constant level of lockdowns based on the amount of positive cases. Now, positive PCR cases, which the PCR tests are positive and deaths occurring. Now, vaccination is seen as the safety factor of this whole scenario. This is a disease that people say, let's give it a 2% mortality rate, which is high.
Okay.
Up 2% is normally, when you calculate it out, is either 1% or less than 1%. People are indicating that this mortality rate occurs in people who are aged, who are, as I say, comorbidities of the non-communicable diseases.
Yes.
And a large factor that is not being pushed as strong as we should in Trinidad is the level of obesity in Trinidad and Tobago. Mm-hmm. It's a serious factor that is causing most of the mortality. Now, vaccination is being done and pushed forward, indicating that if you are vaccinated, the chances of you succumbing to disease is less than if you're not vaccinated.
Okay.
However, if you're not vaccinated, you can, as you say, survive the disease if you get it.
Yes, you're less susceptible, yes, to
yeah, you're less susceptible.
Yes.
So it depends on your comorbidities, your obesity level, your ability to, your whole ability. But I saw a death certificate yesterday. It said that the person died from respiratory disorder. The morbid condition that caused it, they put COVID. But the antecedent causes, which is the less causes, were ischemic heart disease, cerebrovascular accident, which is a stroke, renal failure, respiratory distress. Now, if somebody has all those problems and then they get sick, but they are positive with COVID, the chances of that person making it is very, very low.
Very slim, yes.
But then they indicate that COVID is the one responsible. So that fear factor is playing a very, very big part in the vaccination trust. And you have, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Khan, I'm hearing, what I'm hearing you saying as well is that there could possibly be a percentage of persons, who were would have been deemed to have died, who would have probably possibly gotten a wrong diagnosis? Is that what is that a possibility? In terms of when you do the assessment,
Right.
scientific.
What I'm looking at, yes, the cause of death, the primary cause of death, and the antecedent cause of morbidity may not be COVID itself. It may have been their cardiac function, their respiratory function, their asthmatic function, a cardiac demise, and you end up with a respiratory demise. However, they just so happen to have COVID. Now, from what I've investigated, when somebody goes into the institution, major as an emergency chest case, they are given a blood test to see if they have COVID or positive. It's called an antigen test. If that antigen test is positive, you are put in a tent and wait while you are swabbed for 2 days. While that is happening, your cardiac function, which is what you went through with, is deteriorating.
Begins to deteriorate.
When you get to the cardiac function, or you get a COVID protocol, which is not a cardiac protocol, or renal protocol, which is a kidney protocol, or respiratory protocol. It's a COVID protocol.
Okay.
And you end up dying. So you see, you have to investigate that level of, but you can't do it. You can't investigate because you're not allowed autopsies. An autopsy would have showed you exactly what was the cause of death. But once you put COVID down on a death certificate, autopsy take a backseat, and you end up being buried or burnt as a COVID patient.
Dr. Khan, this which you alluding to, I believe is needs some sort of focus, investigation. I wasn't aware that there was so much pertaining to the diagnosis process and how you go about actually getting that process all through or through the system. But it's interesting that you mentioned that point, because I think it is also important for clarity, that people get a clearer understanding as to the process, because you did make mention that there is no opportunity to get any kind of data, in many of these instances.
Yeah, sorry, it's difficult to get data because the only data you are getting is the data of the positive PCR test.
Yes, and that's what I was referring to. Yes.
Yeah, and you're not getting an autopsy data. You're not getting that type of data at all. So the actual cause of death is assumed. It's not specific. But let's go ahead. That is one part of it. The other part of it, this is a disorder that a lot of people in this country and the world, they are walking around right now with positive COVID symptoms or no symptoms at all. But they are positive.
Is symptomatic, yes.
But they have positive COVID. If you test them randomly, you will get at least 60% of them positive COVID who have not been tested as yet. What you find, how much 12 to 15, let's say 20,000 people have been assessed. That is what they are basing a lot of the results on. However, that's only 20,000. This country has 1.3 million people. I think it's 60,000 tests have been done, that's it, or 100-something thousand tests. Yes. What I'm saying is that 20,000 of that has been shown positive. However, somebody could be negative now and be positive tomorrow. If you test them now, they may show negative, but it could be positive tomorrow based on the disease. So
that's an interesting point, Dr. Khan.
Yeah, so I test you now and you show negative, but I can test you tomorrow and you show positive because
what is really responsible for that variance, Dr. Khan? In one day or one time you're positive and another time you're negative. What is responsible for that?
Suppose you are infected with the virus, but it has not built up to the extent of being positive. The serology is not showing it. However, you may be asymptomatic, and the next day or two, you could be positive as a PCR test.
Mm.
Now, remember this whole thing is being assessed on a nasal swab PCR test.
Yes. Yes.
And what some pundits have been saying, the guy who invented the PCR test said that if you dilute it long enough, you are going to get a positive coronavirus PCR positivity.
This is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings with this special edition, Year in Review. Topic number 5 brought us to focus in August on the road ahead for small and medium-sized businesses in Trinidad and Tobago, or SMEs, that suffered a bruising over the several months. And we are now going to focus on SMEs as we recap 6 of the topical issues of 2021.
As the government, you, from that macro perspective, and it's a bit surprising, that's the nicest way I can put it, to hear the Prime Minister, basically calling for maybe some assistance from somebody from the university.
Yes.
To
he's calling for studies, statistics, data.
Plans. And I'm thinking, but you have an entire central bank with so many economists, you have so many financial planners, strategists, you have actuaries, you have all kinds of persons there at the central bank, and this is what they should be doing. So I don't understand the call for some random person from a university who would not have the data, the resources, the wherewithal, or the means that the central bank is possessed of to be giving you the kind of information that you need to now put an economic plan in place. That's what your central bank is for, because the central bank is supposed to help you start to stabilize and manage your economy in a way that you can now say, okay, all right, so these are the resources I have going forward. This is where I have a shortfall. This is where I need to improve. And therefore now you come up with a plan. And that's how I thought it would be done. So it again belies the fact of what I just mentioned, that there appears to be no plan that the government has for our medium to long-term economic recovery.
All right, and I will allow you to develop that point a little further on, a little later on in the program. Let me welcome Mr. Jai Laladar Singh joining us inside the Citizens Community Forum. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Stephen. My apologies for being late, but I'm happy to join you all. Thank you very much. Martin, good night.
Jai. It's a pleasure.
Right.
It's a pleasure.
A pleasure, Martin.
Yes.
Yes, Jai, you had us concerned for a while there, whether or not you were able to join us, but thank you all the same. We are discussing this business of SMEs, Jai, and we wanted to get a perspective as to where we are, where we should be going, and of course having a plan, a recovery plan. Let me just bring you in here as you've just joined us. Where do you see us in terms of, we're talking about the SMEs, where are we now, Jai, from your perspective, and where do you think we need to be going, knowing that, we've had some 15 months of an economic lockdown, and the small and, medium-sized enterprise sector has been out of commission, for the last, 5-6 months. Where are we now? Your assessment?
We are in a very dark place. As Mr. Sir Vivian Naipaul wrote in a title of his book, we are in an area of darkness. Now, I want to begin by stating that I do agree with Martin, that you have the central bank collecting all this data. And how are you converting this data into value? And he's put it succinctly, into a plan. That's one important aspect of the central bank. But more importantly, Stephen, is that the government need to bring the chambers into a discussion, a round table, Martin, with all the key stakeholders to give their points at this round table, what is happening, why it is happening, and what we need to do. What are the steps for the future? Now, basically, Steve, man, I'm getting into the SMEs. What is happening is that we are all managing uncertainty. The playbook to manage this pandemic has not been written. we are writing it as we go along, right, Martin?
Yes,
and that is what is happening. But to write it is not just up to one stakeholder alone, which is the government. It is all other stakeholders. It is the institutions, it is the business class. Yes, we have a role to play, the central bank, and we need to come together to do a plan for recovery. Now, the SMEs. I want to start off by giving some statistics to your listening audience. According to the Ministry of Legal Affairs, there are 28,000 registered businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Stephen, bear in mind, this is the formal sector.
Right.
There is another sector called the informal sector.
Yes.
Not much studies has been done, but there is someone by the name of Dr. Sandra Supram of UE who has done extensive research. Government and private sector need to get their hands on her research, meaning to bring her in in the discussion to find out exactly what is the state of the informal sector. And that's one. Out of that 28,000 registered businesses, 17,000 belong to the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector. That is absolutely important to note. We at the Confederation did a quick and dirty survey among our 16 different business associations. And in that 16 different, the raw data coming in, it appears that 5,000 businesses approximately will be permanently closed. And more are going to be closed as time goes by. This is happening simply because, and you gave an accurate timeline of the lockdowns. Some of these businesses, Mr. Cummings, need weekly and monthly sales to survive, to pay employees, to keep operating. It didn't happen. And Martin, my understanding is much harder in Tobago right now. And all the hotels are closed.
Yes.
And you're dealing with a very small resident population.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Population. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And Stephen, the SME sector in Chaguanas, Hoover, Gasparillo, Marabella, Pinal Davis, it's a community base as well. Point 14. I mean, that community needs a lot of help. Pfizer bad. They need a lot of help as well. But the thing is that their operations will curtail. This country, Stephen, cannot take a third lockdown. We cannot.
But
Jai, that is what I'm afraid of. That is what I'm really afraid of, because the thing is, if we don't manage the reopening properly, and you see, I'm particularly concerned when you talk about schools being fully reopened by October.
Yes.
That is of concern to me, because to me, that is the greatest super spreader event. You're talking hundreds of thousands of citizens coming out every day, Monday to Friday. Then you think of all the transport that is required, all the taxis, the maxi, the drivers, the conductors, then the parents who have to drop children back and forth, the interactions with people in the PTA, the suppliers to the schools, the teachers, I mean, it is going to be a nightmare if we are not properly vaccinated.
There is an interlink, because once you talk about school children, you're talking about transportation, you're talking about, so many other linkages.
So many other ancillary things.
Yes.
That's correct. Just the people who run in the cafeterias in the schools, who serving food, drinks, whatever for the children, those who doing the school feeding, the nutritionists. So I mean, it is wow. I am most worried about that if we are not properly vaccinated. And then the other thing, Jai, is if it is that you have parents who are vaccine hesitant or vaccine resistant, then that means for sure they are not going to let you vaccinate their children. They will resist.
That is also true. I just want to touch back on the SME sector, and then we'll dive into the whole issue of the schools and the public servants and the teachers and so on. So the thing is that, Stephen, and to your listening audience, a lot of these businesses are going to remain closed. What is going to happen to these people who are unemployed? What is the social dislocation and that is taking place? Now, another thing I want to say, Stephen, is that yes, we could help these closed businesses reopen, but they're not going to get help from the banks, because the banks solely depend on debt financing, and an SME could only take so much of debt. They can't go beyond a certain level.
Yes.
And the resilience is exceedingly limited owing to the SME size. It's not a Nilan Massey or Ansa Makal you're talking about. These are very small businesses that employ 3 to 5 people, running by a husband and wife. It's actually tough.
Moms and pops. Yes.
Moms and pops is actually tough. And I mean, this business is a legacy that they want to leave for their progeny. And that is what makes it hard.
And we continue with our year in review here on the Citizens Community Forum. We move now to topic number 4. October was the month of the national budget, and there were many reactions to what was a $52 billion fiscal package. Reactions to Budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a global pandemic. But when you look at what the minister would have said in his budget presentation as well, he is looking for, I think, 2024 towards a balanced budget, Rishi. Do you think that that is achievable, knowing that we've had a history of budget, of deficits, going back as far as I suppose you and I can remember? A balanced budget in 2024, is that an achievable feat, Rishi?
I would be amazed if the minister could actually achieve that. I know prior administration have come in and made the commitment that, during their term, within 4 years, they'll bring the budget back in line with, you spend exactly how much you make. While I applaud the minister and the government for having a target, I mean, it's good to have a target. You need to have something to aim for. Given everything that we have as a country in terms of our high dependency on oil and gas, and we know what's going on with that. Even with ascendancy in oil prices and natural gas prices now, I think I've seen recently on BBC where Europe is looking for higher gas prices during this winter. The fact is that we do not produce. Our problem is that the production just isn't there.
Yes, very low.
We're not producing
production levels.
And even if we have now discovered, I think within the recent year, 6 months, we've discovered certain, troves of natural gas. It's one thing to discover; it's another thing to bring up to production.
Yes,
that takes another 2-3 year timeline.
And then you are faced with global market forces.
And who knows exactly? Because again, we are price takers. We don't set the price. So it's really something that I think the government has to look at. But I think it's important that we really try as best as possible to curb expenditure with how much we're coming in at revenue. It's an important step because the fact is also, especially with the pandemic, accelerated our borrowing, and we have been borrowing extensively over many years. Even during the time of the previous administration, there still was extensive borrowing.
Yes.
And that borrowing, again, it creates a debt level that has to be paid. It's probably not going to be paid, in this 5-6 year, probably going to be paid by us later on, or by our children or children's children. So there's a debt burden. And the fact is, can we generate enough economic activity to be able to maintain that debt burden? So while again, like I said, while I applaud the minister for having a target of 2024, I just honestly, to the best of my ability, don't see that happening where you can bring expenditure down to revenue.
Richard, the issue of transfers and subsidies, and this whole business of the social safety net, I know that not only this administration, but going back to several administrations, every budget that is presented, there's always that area of sensitivity where even this current budget, the finance minister was clear to state that he's not going to really have any cuts, if at all, where the social sector is concerned. And my question is, how long can we afford to carry this sector, knowing that that the more that you give, the more there will be that need. So that how long do you think that we'll be able to carry such such a sector? Barring the fact that we may be seeing some spikes, upward spike in terms of the price of oil. I think the minister did talked about a $65 US per barrel. So that, I mean, how long, in spite of that, what do you see for the future of the social sector in Trinidad and Tobago?
It's definitely a challenge that you need to have a level of trust. And I believe that there are sectors, the social sectors, in terms of you have a lot of NGOs civil society-based organizations, labor, business, all have a part to play, not only the government. They're not only carrying this burden, but uplifting people out of vulnerable situations and putting them on a level where they can see about themselves. I don't think anybody wants to see somebody live on grants for the rest of their lives. Obviously, it needs to be there because there are certain sectors of the society that will need that help. Come with me. But obviously, these are extraordinary times, as we've said before. And these are extraordinary times where government has had to, dip into its coffers and provide, benefits for people that normally would not need to get these benefits.
Yes.
But obviously, in order to come out of it now, because obviously it's a burden that cannot be carried out for too long, because definitely it's going to then be a weight on the treasury, a weight on resources. I mean, this is where government needs. I think this is where I did not get from the budget, especially those small and medium enterprises, those small businesses that are out there that employ a large sector of the community. We know the big companies out there have had the ability to weather the storm.
Yes.
But the people who have been affected are the people who work
Small,
in these
micro, medium
small,
size.
micro, the bars, people who work in restaurants, people who work in casinos, people who live. I don't mean no disrespect to this, but paycheck to paycheck because of their needs and everything else that they have to deal with. I didn't see anything in the budget that provides some level of comfort or guarantee or some level of support to these businesses. Because one way to get people off these grants, you visit the malls. I've been to the malls as of late. Just recently, I passed through Port of Spain on one of my few occasions, and you're seeing, stores that are normally there closed.
Okay.
Good example, the TSTT that used to be on Independence Square. I think that's where McDonald's used to be, and now it used to be TSTT. It's up for sale.
Okay.
So,
yes, I can get a sense. Yes, I think your message is very well received, and we just like to remind our listeners that you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. Our topic this evening: reactions to Budget 2021-2022, resilience in the face of a global pandemic. And I have with me Mr. Rishi Maharaj, Managing Director of Privacy Advisory Services Limited.
I would like to see actual implementation coming out of this budget. We've all heard the talk before. We've all heard some of these ideas talked about on numerous occasions. I think it's about meaningful implementation on the government's hand. I think it's about meaningful accountability or holding the government to account for its action. And that's, I think, where the media, civil society, the labor unions, all citizens play an important part in ensuring that this is what you said you were going to do. Have you done it? And if not, explain to us why not.
This is the Citizens Community Forum Special Edition, Year in Review. I'm Stephen Cummings, recapping 6 of the many topical issues of the year gone by. We take a short break now, and when we come back, we continue. Be part of the Citizens Community Forum, a place where we bring to light and discuss critical community, social and national issues, discussions on health, leadership, governance, crime, education and social justice.
We might shift from focusing on whole language approaches to focusing on developing phonemic awareness. So we're just teaching phonics, and then the role of comprehension, the vocabulary development, making sure students can visualize when they read. We're not addressing those needs. So you're right.
And as a matter of fact, I don't know, Stephen, if you know this, but there are some places in the States where the legal drinking age is 21 and not 18. Even though there are persons advocating for our age of consent to be dropped back to 16.
You are dealing with developmental stages of learning. Should it start at the primary, secondary? Where should it start?
Very, very good question.
So there are studies that are being done. The thing about it, Mr. Cummings, let's be honest, how many people really sit and read those studies, or even, I mean, a lot of things are coming in different forms. A lot of the data, a lot of the research is coming in video forms and so on. In our own society, how has research been articulated on this pandemic?
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum as we continue to recap 6 of the many topical issues of the year gone by. We move now to topic number 3, and again in the month of October saw an unprecedented development involving the Police Service Commission, where we focused on investigating the role and function of independent public institutions. He is also a former chairman of the Police Service Commission, and indeed one who is well experienced not only on parliamentary matters but constitutional matters. Mr. Mohammed, good evening to you and welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Good evening to you, Mr. Cummings. It's a pleasure to be with you on your program this evening. Separation of powers means exactly that. Constituted bodies are under our Constitution, and they carry out various executive functions, and they are expected to be independent of each other and separate from each other. That is what is termed the separation of powers. You have 3 major arms of executive authority under our Constitution, interfering in the exercise of or rather the discharge of the responsibilities and the functions of the Police Service Commission.
Yes.
They remain insulated, isolated. However, there have to be a crossing over at some time. For example, again, using the Police Service Commission as an example,
yes,
the Parliament is the body, according to the existing laws, that will approve the appointment of a commissioner of police or an acting commissioner of police,
yes,
or a deputy commissioner of police or an acting deputy commissioner of police. However, in coming to the conclusion as to who are the persons who should be enlisted for consideration, the Police Service Commission, the members of the Police Service Commission, they do this independently of the legislature, independently of the president, independently of the judiciary. And that is where their independence is really focused. However, there comes a time when they have to move this process to another level. What do they do? According to the law, they have to submit a list of persons whom, in their opinion, ought to be considered for whatever vacancy exists.
Okay.
When they draw up that list, again without any interference, that list is submitted to the head of state, the president. The president is now under a duty to take that list and submit that list to the parliament.
Yes.
Now the people's representatives, who are the members of the parliament, they will consider the recommendations of the Police Service Commission, and they will have full and free discussions in the form of a debate as to whether or not someone should be appointed the Commissioner of Police or Acting Commissioner of Police, as the case might be. And there are those who may voice a contrary opinion. And there is where the voice of the people will be echoed on their behalf by their elected representatives.
All right, so that there's a process, and
There is a process.
yes. So we'll develop that point a little further on, as you talked about the Police Service Commission, but there are some other areas we wanted to touch on as well. But at this time, we'd just like to remind our listeners that you are viewing and you're listening to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. I have with me Mr. Nizam Mohammed, attorney at law, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, and a former chair of the Police Service Commission. Our topic this evening: investigating the role and function of independent institutions in a constitutional democracy, focus on Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Mohammed, before we continue, I just wanted us to get a listen to the part of a press conference that the Prime Minister spoke, and just part of what he would have said, dealing with this same business of independence in institutions. And I'd have you respond to that. Let's just get a listen to the Prime Minister as he spoke at a previous conference.
The population has been disturbed for the last 2 or 3 weeks on this question of breach and separation of powers. I have addressed this matter here before, without going into much detail, that this question of independence, when you talk about this independent commission, and independent this and independent that, for the man in the street or the man in the taxi going to town, that independence has in it, even in law, it has in it a certain element of interaction. There's no public entity that is cloistered to independence. I've seen people asking, they want to know if the Prime Minister went to the President's house. And until the country knows that, we will not know if our democracy has been breached and our democratic future is in peril and so on. Absolute hogwash. And misleading people who rely on them for guidance and get that as professional guidance. I took 2 oaths of office. One at President House to be Prime Minister, and one in the Parliament. And under my oath of office, as long as I hold this oath of office, I am required by law to communicate with the office of the President, by law.
Mr. Mohammed, the Prime Minister there, Dr. Keith Rowley, as he spoke at a previous press conference, dealing with this very same subject again, I think that he would have echoed some of the very same things that you've just said there, Mr. Mohammed.
You recall him saying that no matter how much independence, words to the effect,
yes,
no matter how much independence there is in any institution, there has to be, and I'm using my word, a bit of crossover.
Yes, yes. But sometimes that crossover, is on a very thin,
very, yes,
line. And therein lies some of the issues that we have from time to time, Mr. Mohammed. And how can we treat with a situation where we have to have this sort of interlink, but yet still there is a demand on institutions to be independent?
Question.
Yes, I'm saying that when there is such a thin line between when we talk about independent institutions and separation of powers, how do we treat with that particular area that sometimes lends itself to the kinds of problems that we have ever so often, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but I'm sure in other democracies.
Indeed, there is a very thin line, and there is where we repose the trust and the confidence in the leadership of our country to ensure that we do not overstep that thin line. For example, in the appointment of a commissioner of police, you may have also heard in the last few days the Prime Minister saying that he had communicated with the Police Service Commission and he had indicated some of his concerns concerning the outgoing Commissioner of Police.
Yes.
And he had written to them, I think, more than once. Now, he is doing that in his capacity as the Honorable Prime Minister of the country, one,
Yes, duty
head of
bound under the Constitution, is it?
duty bound under the Constitution, and by virtue of being head of the cabinet, and by virtue of being head of the National Security Council, it is extremely important for the Prime Minister to be comfortable with the appointment of a Commissioner of Police.
This is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings with this special edition, Year in Review. We move now to topic number 2 in the month of December. December 6th was a historic day for the island of Tobago that saw a sweeping victory for a new political entity, the Progressive Democratic Patriots, the PDP, and coming out of a 14-1 election result in favor of the PDP, we focused on the future of Tobago, implications for the Twin Island state. Discuss some very important matters this evening, David, as it relates to Tobago. And I want to, pose one of the first questions to you. David, many are still asking what really happened on December 6th in Tobago.
Well, in a word, it was a blowout. The PNM suffered a tremendous defeat, a huge defeat, and the PDP scored a huge victory. And of course, but that's just identifying the 14-1. In additional quantitative terms, when you compare the January elections, which ended, as you said earlier, in the 6-6 tie, the situation then was that the PDP did not win the popular vote. So the numbers of persons who came out to vote in January was smaller. There was some, I think 47% or 50% of the electorate came out to vote in January, whereas 57, I think, percent came out to vote in December. So you had an increase in the numbers of persons coming out to vote. And secondly, the PNM won the popular vote by somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 votes in January. But this time they lost the popular vote to the PDP. So the PDP got almost 5,000 more votes than the PNM in this election. So there was both an increase in the actual numbers of people coming out to vote, as well as a very significant increase in the numbers of people coming out to vote for the PDP. And that was an example, and as a manifestation of the momentum that the PDP took from January straight down into December, and so on. So that's a quantitative analysis.
Yes.
If I could back up a little bit, because you did say quite correctly that the PNM had 21 unbroken years of control of the Tobago House of Assembly. And that is absolutely correct. It's very interesting because prior to that, the Democratic Action Congress, led then by Mr. A.N.R. Robinson, won the first THA elections. I think it was around 1980 or thereabouts.
That was another historic event as well, but go ahead.
It was. That was the first time that the House of Assembly was re-established after the annexation or the joining of Trinidad with Tobago, or Tobago with Trinidad under the British colonial rule. So when the THA was re-established, Dr. Williams was Prime Minister at the time, but Mr. Robinson's party was the Democratic Action Congress. He had 2 seats in the parliament. They won the 2 Tobago seats, East and West, in the 1976 elections. And then put pressure on the government to reestablish the THA, which happened, and he became the first chairman of the THA. So the DAC, and then after the DAC
that was the Democratic Action Congress?
That is correct, yes. And after the DAC folded up in 1986 to be part of the National Alliance for Reconstruction, the NER continued to win in Tobago in the THA, so that the PNM was out of control of the THA from its inception all the way up to 2001. Yes? So you had a 20-year period when the PNM could not win in the THA. In fact, at one time, the PNM only had 1 seat, like they have again now. Yes? And so on. So there's always been, even before Mr. Robinson, but there's always been a body of the electorate in Tobago concentrated
Bicycle.
primarily in Tobago East, that has not historically supported the PNM. And of course, this has fluctuated in terms of who could win the seats and so on, depending on the leadership in Tobago of the respective parties. Mr. Robinson had a certain stature. Mr. Ho Choi Charles continued that and so on. And you had other people who were there, Mr. Jeff Davidson and others.
Indeed.
And then, of course, you had Mr. London. So, over London for the PNM. So these were major figures in Tobago that led their respective parties to and to control the THA. So what has clearly happened is that initial core section of the electorate that historically was never PNM, the PDP was able to capture that and build on it. The TOP had it for a period. That with Ashwa Jack, they had it for a brief period, but they couldn't hold it.
TOP, yes.
And Mr. Duke was able to capture that, and then Mr. Fali Augustine came in, and and so on. So that is one of the factors that resulted in that huge change. But there are many other factors. Of course, I'm not Tobagonian.
Yes,
and so yeah.
We'll seek to explore those other factors. So, yes. So David, is it a case of history repeating itself?
Yes, I think so. I think that, there obviously people want to change. I think, the media has interviewed a number of people.
About the one seat, that one seat that was, that one
yes,
seat.
It was the PNM held one seat. Mr. William Mackenzie held that. In fact, I think he died not too long ago, just a few months ago, And Mr. William Mackenzie was a lone assemblyman in the THA for several terms of the THA, 2 or 3 terms. He was a lone assemblyman holding the fort for the PNM in the THA, and until they were able to gain more ground and more popular support, and as the support for Ho Choi Charles started to ebb, and so on, and with Mr. Robinson moving off the political stage, giving up his position as member of parliament and then becoming president, and therefore moving off the direct political stage, that support ebbed, and Mr. London was able to move in. What was also significant is that around that time that Mr. London came to the fore, the PNM changed its structure because they recognized that there was a very strong dislike by Tobagonians of any Port of Spain or Trinidad-centric party.
Central government, yes.
And the PNM was seen as Trinidad, yes. And so the PNM created what they now call the Tobago Island Council of the PNM.
Yes.
One of the, and there's a political leader of that PNM Island Council. So within the PNM structure, they began to give a little bit more space and autonomy. And when Mr. Manning was Prime Minister, he not being Tobagonian, and Mr. London having a very high stature, Mr. London and the Tobago Council really made the PNM in some respects more connected with the identity of Tobago.
Yes.
And somewhat less connected with the identity of Balize House and Port of Spain and Trinidad.
Right.
And I think that contributed to the PNM success, certainly in the early
21
period.
year. 21 year, yeah.
Certainly up until, I would say, the last few years, yes.
But of course,
but that began to yes, but that also began to weaken some years ago, because of course the TOP did win the 2 Tobago parliamentary seats as part of the People's Partnership in 2010, and they won 4 seats in the assembly in 2009 THA elections. I think it was 2009. So the PNM's control was beginning to be loosened before, but then they regained it, largely because of the TOP's very close identification with the UNC in Trinidad and with the partnership, and so
yes, well, we all know what happened there, and with the sentiments on the ground in Tobago, with respect to a possible UNC infiltration. But that's a topic for another discussion. But we just want to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic this evening: future of Tobago, implications for the Twin Island state following December 6 election results. I have with me former government senator, political analyst, and leader of the Movement for Social Justice, David Abdullah. David, where does Tobago go from here? We have now, what, a 14-1 in terms of the, when we look at seats. One gets the sense, David, that it's not going to be, even though there is a 14 on one end and 14 on one, it's not going to be an easy ride. Where does Tobago go from here?
Yeah, well, the PDP with such a large victory got a significant mandate to do things very differently in terms of governance.
And that's where I'm heading, yes. Where do we go from here?
And also in terms of the economic model of development. So this 14-1 result opens up the possibilities for change, for significant change,
and
even though, of course,
the
strictures of the existing, and great expectations, even though there are constraints based upon the existing legal framework.
This is the Citizens Community Forum Special Edition, Year in Review. I'm Stephen Cummings, recapping 6 of the many topical issues of the year gone by. And we leave you with this final topic, topic number 1, the final in 6 topical areas chosen for 2021. Vaccination, job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. You know, importantly, there are some important matters we wanted to address in this first half hour, Mr. Johnson. And I know that, you know, it's been tugging at the hearts of not just, you know, the trade union movement, but public sector workers and, by extension, the larger community. Mr. Johnson, the Riot Act has been read. We all heard it, vaccinate or else, from the trade union perspective. And where does your union stand in relation to what the Prime Minister would have said on Saturday? I want to start, you know, by getting a perspective from you and your union.
Certainly, Mr. Cummings, and just to indicate, perhaps the statement by the Prime Minister was not a total surprise, because he would have sort of signaled that about 3 weeks ago when he did an address to the nation. So he was sort of signaling where he was going. But there are some serious implications in terms of the announcement that have been made. We are in what we might call in this country unexplored territory.
Uncharted waters, yes.
Uncharted waters. The COVID-19 itself has been described as unprecedented. And now we see the actions of the government led by the Prime Minister also leading us into uncharted waters, as you would call it. Certainly my own union, we would have a concern, because whilst we do not represent workers in the government service, we do represent, of course, workers in the what we might call the public sector.
Yes.
Those are state entities, and clearly the signal from the Prime Minister indicates they are going to be affected as well.
Yes.
So
yes, he did make mention that the mandate would also, you know, demand that state enterprises be, you know, come under that fold as well.
Yes, so that is of concern to us, because we certainly represent possibly at least a dozen, you know, just off the top of my head, at least a dozen areas where we have recognized majority status in the public sector. And we are looking at this very closely. The Joint Trade Union Movement would have had an emergency meeting this morning. My union is a affiliate of the Joint Trade Union Movement, and I'm sure you're aware there would have been a press conference earlier today.
Yes.
Which would have been articulated in the main by Comrade Ansel Roger, the president of the Joint Trade Union Movement. So our position and concerns haven't really changed in terms of our position on what is referred to as mandatory vaccinations. In that, first of all, to start off, let me just make this statement, as was done this morning. We are not against the vaccination as a voluntary process. In fact, we strongly encourage all of our members to get vaccinated as we follow the science. Not because we believe the vaccine is a cure, but it has clearly been shown that it can mitigate and give one an extra layer of protection in the event, unfortunately. So there's no issue with that. We have always, however, articulated, just like the trade union movement on the whole, that what we are against is either what we might call forced or mandatory.
Yes,
yeah. Because the reality is, Mr. Cummings, is that there are workers, they may be in the minority, but there are workers who, for one reason or another, religious, medical reasons, and some workers and some citizens of this country simply have what they might call personal moral or personal beliefs, may not even be called religious beliefs, but certain beliefs by which they hold strong, dearly to. And for those reasons, we feel that the issue of choice must remain, and therefore for the government to come and mandate that basically if you don't work, if you're not vaccinated, you cannot work, and if you don't work, of course, you don't get paid, is essentially basically a retrenchment.
All right.
Those workers who do not or are not able to be vaccinated certainly face the risk of, even though the Prime Minister have said you will have a job, you will be furloughed, which is a new, in a sense, a thing.
I was just about to make mention of that. I mean, I understand the meaning of the word, but I haven't heard the word for quite some time. I guess there wasn't, an environment that created, the use of that term. But certainly, we just, before we continue, we'd just like to remind our listeners and our viewers that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic this evening: job security, employer-worker relations now and post-pandemic. I have with me a representative from one of the leading trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Trevor Johnson. Mr. Johnson, is this a perfect cocktail for further instability and social upheaval in Trinidad and Tobago in an already tense industrial relations climate? We know what has been happening in terms of the history with workers' benefits. We've been talking about so many unsettled matters, industrial relation matters. Is this a perfect cocktail for further instability if not handled properly?
Yes, well, Mr. Cummings, it certainly has the potential for that. We would certainly hope, as citizens of this beloved country, that does not occur. But if one looks at, for example, what has been happening in some other jurisdictions or some other parts of the world, in France, in Belgium, in Germany, etc., just to name a few, in Spain, etc., you will see where they hold dearly, some may say more dearly than for what they call their rights and their freedoms and their liberties.
Rights to self-determination, yes.
Right, and they have been on the street in mass numbers. I mean, thousands. You have seen people being arrested, people, being, pepper spray and so forth. So that clearly in some jurisdictions, you are seeing that people are taking this matter their rights
level, yes.
They perceive to be the taking away of their rights to be a very serious thing, and they therefore are going on the street. So when you talk about the issue of is it a perfect cocktail of some sort of industrial unrest, etc. Comrade Ansel Roger did emphasize this morning that the trade union movement wants to operate in terms of doing everything that is legally possible.
Yeah.
So we are not looking to create some kind of upheaval, but we will certainly, if it is necessary, register in the strongest possible way our disapproval of the government's actions, because one, it is considered illegal because they have not had any dialogue before that, prior to that announcement. If this is an employer issue, as you indicated earlier, then there was an obligation on the part of the government to have dialogue with the social partners, with the trade unions, especially.
In keeping with what you would say in good industrial relations.
Good industrial relations, so that we should not be hearing it as an announcement, as a public announcement, like the rest of the population. There should have been some prior whether we agree or disagree, the fact is government had an obligation.
Well, that's what I'm hearing.
More,
yes, well, that's what I'm hearing from the trade unions. And, you know, I've been looking even before this announcement that came on Saturday. There was a report that came out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Johnson, where teachers were sent home because of an issue. Some teachers felt that they did not want to have that issue of vaccination forced upon them. And by extension, the government started to move to have them I don't know what you want to call it, if it's retrenched or, you know, followed, whatever. But certainly we've been seeing a similar type of, you know, thing happening around the world. And I just referenced St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think I saw another report where, was it in France somewhere, where workers were simply told, you know, if you are not vaccinated, you know, go home. So is it that we've been seeing a new trend, you know, developing, something that we in Trinidad and Tobago possibly have been following? You know, there's a saying here in Trinidad and Tobago that whenever, you know, the US or wherever catches a cold, we tend to be the ones to sneeze. Is it that we are not looking at how we treat with our own peculiarities in Trinidad and Tobago, and we tend to be mirroring that which we see in other countries, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, Mr. Cummings, it certainly appears like that. As you said, yes, there have been issues in several other countries. St. Vincent, I would have read the report on the weekend where teachers were sent home. In their case, even though some of the teachers would have worked for the period or part of the period, they were told once you did not adhere to this part of what was now considered a condition, then you would not receive pay.
And this brings us to the end of this special edition of the Citizens Community Forum, where we recapped 6 of the many topical issues of the year gone by. This, our final Wednesday in 2021. I'm Stephen Cummings, wishing you a great year ahead. Be back with you in the new year. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews